and welcome to the garden. This is just a quick update about blight. So I think, like many gardeners across the country, this rather wet and miserable summer we've been having has brought on the blight. So I had some spare tomato plants earlier in the year. Our main crop are in the greenhouses and the polytunnel, and I don't normally grow tomatoes outdoors for that very reason. I know there are some blight resistant varieties now, but the sort that I grow, old traditional varieties, they have very little resistance to blight, so I tend to grow them under cover. Of course, growing under cover doesn't guarantee avoiding the blight, but it certainly helps quite a lot. A few days ago I noticed that our outdoor tomatoes had been hit with blight, and it was pretty bad. They were covered with large green fruit, so another couple of weeks and we might have got a crop off of them, but even the fruit was affected. There were brown patches on the fruit. It wasn't just a few leaves. If it's just a few leaves, you can cut those off and maybe see if the plants will keep going long enough to allow some of that fruit to ripen. But this had also got into the stems, and yeah, they were a write-off. I didn't have my camera with me at the time, so I didn't film that. I just cleared those plants away. What I was far more worried about was our potato crop. So they're all in pots. So I had the old crop that they were more or less going over now, so I wasn't concerned about blight on those. But we had our second cropping potatoes, or our Christmas potatoes. They only recently went in, and they're only a few inches tall, and it would have been a disaster if they'd got blight. And of course, if you get blight at this time of year with an early planting of potatoes, in all likelihood you've got some pretty good tubers there already. You can just cut down the haulms, get rid of those, leave the potatoes alone for a week or two, and then when you lift them, all being well, they're going to be fine. Now, I know that the blight can affect the tubers as well and cause them to rot, but even when we've had it pretty bad on the foliage, most of the tubers have survived, and you've got to keep an eye on them in storage, but it's not a big problem. But on our second cropping potatoes, of course, if they get blight, there's going to be nothing there as a consolation prize. So as a precaution, we have rearranged some of the space in our greenhouses and polytunnel, and we've got all of those pots under cover. It's not guaranteed to keep the blight away, but it might help. And that is one of the big advantages, of course, of growing in pots. If need be, you can move them around. We've left 3 sad specimens outdoors. Now, these were planted much earlier in the year, but from tubers that we'd kept back from spring, and well, nothing much has come from any of these. This very weak growth and not a lot of it. They were very slow to get going. I'm not sure why. We've kept tubers back quite successfully in the past, but this time they just didn't want to do anything. And we had 5 spare, so we planted 5, and only 3 of them came up, and they've been pretty reluctant. I mean, this ratty specimen, I'm pretty sure none of this is blight. It's just generally rubbish. However, on the neighbouring plant, I don't know if it will show up on the camera, but that little brown patch on the edge of the leaf here, that looks suspiciously like the start of blight. And there are a few other areas on this plant which I think could well be blight. So I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few days this plant succumbs. I'll keep an eye on it because I don't want to take the plant out unless that really is blight. But if it starts to spread, I will obviously dispose of these. I don't know if there'll be any useful tubers in these pots. I rather doubt it. These plants are a little bit rubbish. With a bit of effort, we managed to move all of these pots under cover, and the big ones are in the polytunnel. Well, I've had a really good look at the foliage on these plants, and at the moment I can't see any sign of blight on these. It may be that we got them under cover just in time to protect them, and now we're going to have to be really careful about how we water these. I won't be watering them too much. The compost at the moment is still reasonably damp in there, but we will be watering the compost and trying our best to avoid getting the leaves wet. That's a bit of a fiddle, but if the leaves are kept dry, the blight can't really do anything. Now, of course, under cover, if we get a really damp patch again, that won't protect us from the blight entirely, but I can only recall 1 year recently where we had blight under cover. Most years we get away with it, so I am hopeful that we may have rescued these potatoes. Well, I understand lots of gardeners have had problems with blight this year, and I'm not at all surprised. In fact, I'm a little bit surprised that our other potatoes didn't get it earlier. We've now since cut down the foliage on our spring planted crop, and we've moved those pots into the garage where they can stay for a while, and we'll harvest them as and when we need them. But these need to grow on for a couple of months before we get any sort of tubers there, so a late batch of blight would not be welcome. But anyway, if you have the opportunity to move your vulnerable crops under cover, it's not a bad idea. At the moment there is no blight in the greenhouses. The problem we've got in here is botrytis, and there's been a fair bit of that this year, and again that is brought on by the humid conditions. But with a bit of luck, these potatoes will escape the blight and we will get a crop later in the year. I'll return to them, of course, if there's anything interesting to see, but that is all for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.